Okay, so you're a serial entrepreneur, investor, and also a long-term community builder. So I'd love to touch multiple of those hats today, but I'd love to start with your entrepreneurial journey. And maybe ask you to tell us, I know that you have several ventures behind you, but it would be great if you could refer to some of those, the most important, maybe the ones that you have somewhere close to your heart, and those that, if you could recall those and tell us about the most important key success factors of those journeys and what made them successful so that you could now, be involved in all those other adventures.
Thank you very much, dziękuję bardzo. Are you okay with me speaking in English? Okay, that's cool. And by show of hands, how many people here have really no idea who I am or what I've done? And so 1, 2, like quite a lot of people. So I'm fine with that. So my name's Richard, jestem Polakiem. I spent most of my life in Poland. I'm a Polish citizen by choice. I wasn't born Polish. I don't have Polish roots, but I lived here for 32 years. And I was born on an island to the north of France between Belgium and the Republic of Ireland called the United Kingdom, Wielka Britannia. So that's where I'm from originally. But sometimes people say, where are you really from? And I'm really from Kraków. I've spent most of my life here. In terms of business, I'm a real expert in failure and rejection. I've started 36 businesses in my life. The first one I was 8 years old, and most of them have failed. And so, if there's anyone here,
you have to touch that. The first one, you definitely have to tell us about this first one at 8 years old.
Okay, for sure. So the businesses that have succeeded or are succeeding have around 100 million euros revenue, maybe 650 people working for them, but businesses are like children. Some of them are doing well. Others. How many people here are parents? Just wave your hands. Okay, quite a lot of parents. As parents here, sometimes children do well and they have a good period. Other times it's not so good. And anyone who has perfect children is a liar. Okay, children are not perfect. Neither are businesses. So not all the businesses are good all of the time. But generally, the ones that have succeeded are mostly business-to-business businesses. So selling things that I've done that have failed include 2 bars and 1 gastronomia in Kraków. And if anyone here is rich enough to start a bar, my advice is don't. Just be your favorite bar's best customer. It's much easier to be on the customer side of the bar than the barmanka side of the bar. Just don't start a bar. And so where I've done okay is business-to-business businesses, selling to large organizations. It could be the post office or large companies, typically with more than $1 billion revenue. And I'd say business is really simple. You have to. I helped get Światowy Tydzień Przedsiębiorczości going in Poland in 2008, and in Podstawówka, that's Global Entrepreneurship Week. Podstawówka 72 in Woluszowska, where my 3 children were. I persuaded the director to have an event to do with Global Entrepreneurship Week, and good for her. She said yes, but she was very suspicious and. There I was at 8 a.m. in the morning doing a workshop in Polish to 250 kids, including my 3 kids at the back who were very embarrassed that their dad was doing the work. So the pressure on me was, I speak Polish, I passed the language test, jestem Polakiem, jestem bardzo dumnym Polakiem, bo mówię po polsku, I speak Polish, and I passed the test. It's great to be Polish, but doing a workshop at 8 a.m. in front of 250 6 to 8-year-olds, about entrepreneurship in 2008 was part of my journey. And I said, I'll tell you in English. I was speaking in Polish. I said, does anyone here know what a business is? And this little 7-year-old boy stuck his hand up. I said, what's your name? Kuba. Okay, Kuba, what's a business? And he said, well, sir, it's a place where you make something or you provide a service, and you have to sell it for much, much, much more than it costs to make. And most importantly, the people who are buying whatever it is have to be so happy with what you're selling that they don't even think it's expensive. And I looked at the school director, and her jaw literally, and like sometimes the kids in Poland really know more about business, and that is the definition of a business. How many people here are business people, have your own business? Poland is doomed, it's not enough. How many people want to have a business one day in the future? Okay, so for everyone else, you found your future employers in the room. So, Dominika, you were asking about...
Yes, like about this, either the critical success factors that you think were underlying the success of some of those business that were performing well. So I would start with that. And then maybe if you could maybe share some strategies that made those businesses successful, that for those small numbers of entrepreneurs in the room could be relevant.
So I think there's a difference between where I was back in the day and where I am now. I've never had an investor externally in a business. I've bootstrapped everything. And I think that one of the most important success factors is if you have a business idea, don't go and talk to investors. The typical startup model is wrong in the sense it's not the right way to get most businesses started. Even today, I heard a podcast with the founder of Clio, which had a most recent funding round at $900 million. It's the largest law firm automation business, legal practice management software company in the world. He and his co-founder started it with bootstrapping, and the first money came from customers. And I always say to people, if they can, I've invested a lot of money very unwisely in lots of businesses. I'm a real expert in how not to do things, and if you learn one thing from me this evening, it's what not to do. I invested in businesses very often, and people come to me with their ideas, and they want to show me their product, look at my app, look at my deck. And I said, please put your laptop away. Just tell me about the customers and the potential customers, because it doesn't matter what I think about your wonderful idea. What matters is what the customers and the potential customers think about your idea. And if they say, but there are millions of potential customers, then I say, well, if there are millions, it should be really easy to find 8 or 10 and get those 8 or 10 to tell me. So I think the most important thing is to start with the customer. And even if you do need investment, and of course a lot of businesses do need investors, if you haven't talked to customers before you talk to investors, a sensible investor will think you're not an investable product. And if you don't know how to talk to customers, you shouldn't be starting a business, or you should be finding a co-founder who does. I was just talking to an engineer here in the audience who said to me, I'm not, he was actually being very friendly and sociable, but I think he was Polish and not very self-confident. So he said, nie jestem dobrym networkerem. I'm not a good networker, but he was networking with me. But he said, I need a co-founder who has the sales skills. And what I've discovered is the biggest business successes in my life are not my idea and not my work. And when I was younger, this would be very troubling for my ego, because I wanted to be, the guy on the front page of the magazine, and I wanted to be famous, and I wanted to be the guy whose idea was successful. Turns out that it's much better business to find other people's ideas and other people's work and put it together. And if you can get your ego out of the room, then you can do much better. So number 1, customers. Number 2, customers. Number 3, customers. And then try and leave your ego out of it, because if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. You need to find people who are better than you, taller, better looking, harder working, more skilled. Just surround yourself with people better than you, and you have a chance of being more successful than if you're the smartest guy in the room, which may be good for your ego, but it will be bad for your business.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those advices. You touched that there were also some failures on the way. So would you be able to also refer to some of those, or maybe also touch the most common failures that you've seen in other entrepreneurs' journey?
So yes, I think that's a very good question, and again, there's this sort of illness in not just the Krakow, but the European global startup community of fake it till you make it. It's much better to be honest. And even if you lose some business partners who are looking for a showman or showwoman who says the right words but doesn't deliver, it's much better to go into people who are aware of their failures. So the biggest mistake I made was in the 1990s. I made a lot of money in a company called Systemy Kodów Kreskowych, barcode systems. I made very high margins because I was the first importer of barcode scanners and barcode printers and przenośne terminale to Poland. There was one other company, but we were the first company doing it properly. And the margins were very high and the competition was very low. And so I had made money, and success is a very bad tutor. You learn much more from your failures than your successes. And I invested in another business that was losing money. And that's a bad idea. Just I look in the mirror and think, why did I think that was smart? If you're going to invest in a business that's making money, not losing money. But brilliant, Richard. The mistake I made was to make a terrible decision, and then I couldn't admit to myself that I'd made a bad decision. So at the end of every month, when the company was running out of money, I lent it more money. I was the only shareholder who had money. So month after month after month, the balance sheet of the company, the biggest creditor was me, and everyone in the room was expecting me to be the person who kept it going. So I ended up losing a lot of money, and at some stage, a friend of mine said, "Richard, you're being crazy," and persuaded me that I was being crazy. So one thing is, if things are failing, be ready to take the hard decision that they're failing. And for anyone who's had a bit of business success but hasn't yet had a really big disaster, if you remember this story, you will save yourself hundreds of thousands, if not millions of euros. Or it's a really terrible thing to discover.
So which early signs of that failure would you highlight so that people could be more practical about monitoring those?
I mean, I think, if something's successful, you never know exactly why it's successful. And if something fails, you never know exactly why. But number one was low margins. So the cost of... I can't actually go into the details of the business for... there are people around who were involved in that business who, in fact... It was a very, very unpleasant experience for me. There were lots of problems, and I didn't break any laws, but I was suspected of breaking the law to the extent that Wydział Przestępstwa Gospodarcze Urząd Skarbowy Krowodzie, I got called in by the tax police, and this was a tax police where other people in the waiting room were in kajdanki, in handcuffs, and I really thought my life is going badly if you end up in a room where other people are wearing handcuffs. It's really just, if that happens to you, then if that doesn't happen to you, you're doing better than me. But the signs, one is low margins. The second is like bad corporate culture. So this company was sponsoring events, like doing czynność charytatywny while losing money. And I don't think, I'm not religious, but in the Bible, the Good Samaritan who saves the guy who was beaten up at the side of the road had enough money to pay the innkeeper to look after the guy who had been beaten up. Like, if you don't have enough money to pay your payroll, you shouldn't be giving money away. So that was low margins, bad corporate culture, and high cost of sales, and low lifetime value of clients. Lots of things were wrong. And a very bad shareholder called Richard Lucas, who was stupid.
Oh, no, I'm sure not. So let's maybe move from business venture to your another hat, which is more like community building activities, because you also done a lot of those. And I wonder, because I understand that after you left Krakow, you were also involved in Lisbon community and ecosystem. So I'd love you to tell us more about the ecosystem there, and also maybe tell us about some pros and cons in terms of comparing it to Krakow and our ecosystem.
So just to be clear, I haven't left Krakow. I still have one child here, and she's 25, and I have 5 businesses in Krakow. So I'm not gone. I'm still here, as you can see. Jestem obecny w Krakowie. And, I'm going to be a
And you spent winter in Lisbon, right?
As I think it was snowing today, and I'm in Krakow today. So anyway, so you were asking me to compare the community situation. I mean, I think it's very hard to measure community, and I think that neither Lisbon nor Poland are the most dynamic economies and Portugal has attracted an international crowd. There are a lot of people doing business in Portugal, but their customers are not in Portugal. There are a lot of digital nomads, a lot of tech events, but the local market is only 10 million people, and it's a very conservative country. Poland has a slightly bigger domestic market than Portugal, and I would say we have a more dynamic culture here. But the truth is, if you want to be very successful in business, you're not going to be really successful on the Polish market alone. So, I asked earlier how many people here want to have a business, and I think about 10-15% of the people put up their hands. And how many people have a business? Can we do it again? How many people here?
Maybe they understood now after the definition.
Ile ludzi, być może po polsku, ile ludzi tutaj mają działalność gospodarczą czy spółkę, która jest więcej niż samotrudnienie? I'm not talking about solo entrepreneurs like a freelancer. How many people have a business in the sense they employ someone else? Okay, so we have a business that doesn't make a business is a hobby. No, it depends. It depends. I've got loss-making businesses, and they're still businesses. And how many people want to have a business? Chciałby mieć spółkę w przyszłości. So that's not too bad. I'd say if you want a quiet life, don't start a business. Being a business is not necessarily easy. I said that everyone who wants to can have a business, but not everyone. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. But having a business isn't always easy, and there are better jobs now available in Krakow than there used to be. There are quite good jobs in Poland. But the startup culture, I would say that the community is probably, Lisbon's a capital city, it's more international. I think Krakow has the mixed blessings of a lot of business process.
How many people are outside of Krakow or are internationals in a sense?
Ile ludzi tutaj nie są Polacy? How many people are not Polish? Boo. Polska dla Polaków. No, I'm joking. Sorry, I have a very bad sense
our community is also very international, I have to say.
If you don't like Poland, go home. No, sorry, I have a very bad sense of humor. So I think that the fact that there are, it's a cold, whatever it is, Friday, is it a Thursday evening, and there are a lot of people here, suggests that there is some kind of culture. I think that Lisbon has more meetups, and I may be out of touch with the number of meetups, but I think there's more people organizing community meetups, because it doesn't have to necessarily be an agency like OMG KRK or something like Open Coffee. You can have a more spontaneous meetups, and I'm not quite sure why that is, but I would say that kind of community spirit is a bit stronger in Lisbon. But I also think you might get a more intelligent answer from ChatGPT than from me. If you ask Perplexity how many meetups are there in Krakow, Perplexity will know, or ChatGPT will give a better answer.
I don't think that the number would be that correct.
But are there a lot of regular meetups in Krakow? I know there are sort of thematic ones, like there's a Java meetup or an Erlang meetup, but are there general entrepreneurship-focused meetups in Krakow for the men?
There are definitely a few. Definitely we are organizing them from time to time, but also there's another foundation that it's doing
Krakow Miasto.
Exactly. So, but they're doing it for more younger generation. Let's say like high schools students and those. But there are also probably other meetups of this type, right?
The biggest
Open Coffees, let's say, considered more generic, right?
Yeah. How many people here work for a bank that lends money to businesses? Okay, so this is this is terrible. I must have organised more than 250 events. I counted maybe 500 events in Krakow, and we've never had bankers show up. And I think there's something wrong with this city that bankers don't show up to events where there are business people, startup people, and that's so. I mean, there are problems in Krakow. One is that if you were president of the city of Krakow, you should organize a meeting of all the bank directors in Krakow and say, I'd like you to tell me what you're doing to support the startup community. And this would cause great panic because none of them are doing anything. And then the directors would have to there's something. That's one thing. The other is that really successful business people in Krakow don't come to events like this. In Cambridge, the richest people in the city are in rooms like this. I run a project for Cambridge University, and you get not necessarily billionaires, but people who have personal fortunes of 10, 50, 100, 500 million pounds come to events like this, and they invest their money. And the rich people in Krakow, I don't know what they are doing, but maybe I'm wrong.
Query again.
I realise. How many people here have a personal fortune of more than 500 million? 2.5 milliard zloty. How many people here have more than a billion zloty?
and don't want to be robbed afterwards.
Vlad, you can put we know it's you, Vlad. No. But I mean, even like 20 years ago, Rafał Styczyn, one of the co-founders of Comarch, came to a few events, and that was good. I never saw Janusz Filipiak. I did occasionally see the Impost guy, Rafał Brzoska, came to some events. But basically, there's a disconnect between the rich people in the city who have the capital and the startup community. And so... And in Lisbon...
Any tips on how to change that? Like how to bring those people in?
I think it's political leadership. That there's a small town in Austria who's called the City of Togetherness. Its name will come back to me in a moment. The mayor of the city has a meeting for newcomers every year. Anyone who's new in town gets to meet the mayor. So what the president of Krakow should do is have a quarterly meeting with the top business people where if he invites or she invites them, there's a coordination function. I think the government can give medals, they can give prizes, but there are all these people who march around in strange clothes, these old traditional guilds. They even have names to do with przedsiębiorczości, and you only have what? No,
yes, exactly. So there are communities of large corporates as well, right? But they're not mixing that much with startup communities.
And there are things like Business in Małopolska. There are events, but they're not organized with the idea of mixing these business leaders with younger entrepreneurs or fresher entrepreneurs. So it's not. And sometimes you have the form is right, but not the substance, because it's not enough just to rent a big room in, the Air Museum and make it look like the Oscars with flashing lights. Now, I've been to some of those events because somehow I get on the list, and there's very little networking, there's no community building, and it's not an open meeting. So, I'm sorry, it's a bigger topic, but I think that, it's hard and we've tried for many years to do this, but it's not easy.
Thank you for that. I definitely want to add some extra, or you to add some extra advices for our community based on, what you have seen in Lisbon. Like any other tips that we should focus on in terms of growing what we have here?
It's such a big topic. I mean, I think that one thing is, as in life, you can't expect other people to solve your problems, and like anyone in this room who thinks that the situation could be improved.
Exactly, we are looking at you.
No, but it's not. You can't rely on other people to solve your problems. In coming back to Cambridge, the Cambridge Angels, successful business people set up the Cambridge Angels. There are a couple of. How many? I know Vlad. You're in the front row, Vlad, and I know you. There are angel investors in Krakow. how many people here would call themselves an angel investor? I mean, this is wrong. There are angel investors, but there are smart people in this room who are starting businesses, and for whatever reason, the angel investors aren't here. So, and I think that for each topic, you need to make a plan, and that's something that OMG, KRK, together with Krakow, Miastem Startupem, and maybe representatives of cities could make a project for each of these things. But you need to. There's a chicken and egg problem. That how do you get the entrepreneurs to show up without the investors, and how do you get the investors to show up without the entrepreneurs? But I think if you get the entrepreneurs and the investors in the same room, then the lawyers, the bankers, the headhunters, and the patent people will follow. Is getting the entrepreneurs and the investors in the same room is the starting point. And it is work, and it takes time and effort, which is why people like you are necessary.
That's true. I have to say that it's easier when we have for bigger events, right? When we have our summer jam or some bigger events, then it's easier to attract those various groups, right? Because let's say this event.
I'll just comment on that. You need to have regular events.
Yeah.
I think the bi-weekly or monthly cycle is absolutely essential, because you can't build community on once a year events, and people have their business priorities and their families and different things. But if they know that, but it's getting the right people in the room. If you get the people who are positive and have businesses and are ready to be helpful in the room together with investors, then the other people will fall into place.
Wonderful. Okay, and I would like to also ask you, how do you assess, let's say, the level of growth of our entrepreneurs, in a sense, whether when you are out, let's say, out in Lisbon, do you hear anyone saying something about Polish entrepreneurs? Is that a common topic? Or are you aware of any brands that are, let's say, known in Lisbon that grew out of Poland?
If there's someone in the room who wants to share something, please do, but I don't think it's okay to... If someone wants to have a private conversation, please don't do it in the room. But if someone has a question... So I was just asked, how do I assess Polish entrepreneurs? I think, it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what the customers think. It's really I think Poland has a pretty fast rate of growth compared to most European countries for a long time. And although lots of people complain about Polish bureaucracy, it's really not as bad as many of our neighbouring countries. So the Polish government's done a great job of becoming digital, and things are way better here than they used to be. And Poland has a fast growth rate, which means that Poland must be doing something right. And I think it's partly the education system. Our schools are good. Is partly the culture that Polish people don't expect to be prosperous. They work hard, and obviously we've become a very attractive place for foreigners to come. That Poland gives a lot of working visas to foreigners. So, and I think there must be something right about Poland just based on the statistics, but the number of really successful Polish startups, and I think. We shouldn't be complacent. It's not a question of saying or ranking the number of startups. Is our culture supportive of the idea that someone very smart thinks they're going to have a better, more interesting and productive life starting a business than going and working for someone else? And for the people who didn't put up their hand when I said, do you want to have a business one day, you might find in 5 or 10 or 15 years' time, you change your minds, and you don't have to be young. The average startup founder in America is 43 years old. And I guess the average person in this room, apart from, I don't know, how many people here are older than 43? You're young. Jesteś młodzieży. The future belongs to you, You need to start businesses and have children, because otherwise Poland's going to disappear,
That's true.
Both, not necessarily both at the same time.
Okay, so no tips if it comes to scaling because I think that one of the challenges that our companies are facing is and that relates to the most important element that you mentioned today, which is customers. But one of the challenges that startups in Poland are facing is this international aspect. So many of them are focusing that much on the Polish market, and when they finally discover that it will be good to go abroad, they are either not that much prepared for doing that, or their model isn't adjusted to the international market. So I wonder what we could do to make actually more global companies out of Krakow.
It's a very interesting question. And there is a problem of lack of capital, but that's not the people in Germany or France or the UK, where there's obviously more capital than there is here. They also complain about the lack of capital compared to the United States. And so there is a lack of capital, and having international customers, as you said, is how do we encourage it? I think the biggest problem is to find really healthy businesses. That if you find a business where it costs you 100 euros to acquire a customer, and you can bill them thousands of euros every year for the next, if your cost of acquisition is a tenth or 100th of your lifetime value, and you've got a steadily growing number of customers, you will find investors. The problem isn't the lack of capital, it's the lack of great businesses. One of my kids, my son Daniel, is working for a legal tech startup in New Zealand, and they've got $2.5 million revenue this year. Their target for next year is $7 million. Their average client value at the moment is around $5,000 a year with almost no churn. And, it's a great bit. They've got VCs lining up because, it's so attractive. And, it's finding those attractive businesses that's hard. And I think that, it's not a question like, and there are so many business ideas. Let's make a business to automate management of co-working spaces. There are hundreds of companies doing that. Let's automate vets. There are hundreds of companies doing that. It's really hard to find that great business idea. And sometimes you can just do a regular business. You hire programmers in Poland for 150 euros a day, and you sell their time for 750 euros a day. If you can do that, that's a good business. But it's not, no one's going to put you on the front page of Fortune magazine if you're a software outsourcing company. So what can we do? We need to encourage entrepreneurship and encourage people to look for great business ideas.
Okay. And where to look for those inspirations? Like how you were coming up with your business ideas?
Things have changed a lot since I was born in 1966, and when I was young, there were no mobile phones, there was no internet. I told this to one of my children, and she said, "Did you have electricity?" Were the cars? No, I lived in a cave, hiding from dinosaurs. No, I'm not. So, I think no. But the first thing is, any new business idea now, the first step is always try to buy what you want to sell. And you go to Google, you go to Amazon.com, eBay.com, Temu, and you just see whether, if you're any consumer idea, but there are equivalents for industry as well. One of my businesses automates warehouses, and we have a new autonomous guided vehicle for moving goods around warehouses, and it can lift things up that weigh 800 kilograms. It's this little expensive machine we're just testing at the moment. But thanks to ChatGPT or Perplexity, I said, how many consultants are there in Europe who give advice on how to implement this? And immediately they just come straight up. So try to buy what you want to sell is obvious, because people say, there's nima konkurencja. It's just not, it's very, very rare that there's no competition. Obviously search in English and not just in Polish, because maybe there's no one doing it in Poland, but just because there's no one doing it in Poland. Then the second thing is unit economics. What is the gap between the cost, like the little boy in Podstawówka 72, what's the gap between how much you sell it for and how much it costs to deliver? And if you look at but competition isn't necessarily bad if there's someone else doing it. Quite often you look at America, Norway, Switzerland, Singapore, the high-cost countries, and you say, well, how are they doing it there where resources are not limited? It can be a very good thing. Just find out. There was Rocket Internet from Germany who looked at American startups and copied their business models to Europe. But sometimes just look what's going on in London, New York, San Francisco, Japan. You can use the internet and think, oh, no one's doing that in Krakow. Maybe I can do that. But it could be, no one's doing that in Krakow because you need Norwegian salaries to afford that, and Krakow isn't the right place. But it's very hard. What I do is turn on your entrepreneurial radar is like look for any time you have a really strong emotional reaction. Typically in Krakow, you're getting really angry. If you're really pissed off with something, that might be a business opportunity because the fact you're angry might mean there's a problem, which if it was solved, that would be a business opportunity. Or you're very surprised. Why was that so fast? Why was that so cheap? Why was that so expensive? Sometimes you're just astonished that something's so expensive or so cheap or so fast. And so if you're very surprised by something, or very annoyed, you've got a strong emotional reaction, that can be a business opportunity. And for example, when you go through Krakow Airport, you typically get very annoyed with the security processes. That's probably, obviously it's a hard business problem to solve, but the fact that it's annoying to board an aeroplane means that, there's probably someone somewhere will find a better way of getting onto a plane than the one. You know what it's like flying Ryanair, right? To nie jest przyjemne.
Definitely. Okay. So you mentioned before that you were lucky to have some of the co-founders that were doing the job for you. So I wonder how to find a good co-founder, because maybe you may not have an idea right now, but maybe you can find someone who has a really good idea in mind.
I was doing a workshop in AGH, that's one of the best technical universities in Krakow, and it was an entrepreneurship workshop. And I was asked this question, and I said, you need to be a bit careful if there's someone in your team who just is the friendly guy who's not really creating very much value. And there were 3 guys in the front row, and 2 of them looked at the guy in the middle, and it was obvious he was the friendly guy who wasn't adding much value. But if you can be that guy, I sometimes say in a meeting, there's only one place at this table for the guy who gets all the money and isn't working hard, and that's my place. But
exactly, advise us how to do that.
So I mean, obviously, I'm not being entirely serious. I think one thing is to going to default be helpful without asking for things in return. So if you meet people and they've got business ideas, just offer to help them, because if you're a helpful person, then you're much more likely to position yourself as a potential co-founder. Just sometimes people say, and I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is to say time is money, and therefore I shouldn't help people for free because unless someone pays me, that means I'm devaluing my time. I do make quite a lot of money, but you can't save time. Like if I'm not here giving you my time for free this evening, I can't put it in the bank. You can't. So you're only alive once, as far as I know. Maybe when I die, I discover you're all here, and it turns out we live twice. But assuming we only live once, it's just a question of optimizing for each moment. So one thing is go to events where you're going to meet people, and if you meet someone with a great idea, just say things like, "Is there any way I can help you?" And
second side, you can always find someone who will be working for your money.
So can you explain a bit? So thank you. By the way, if there are questions, do wave. And so what you're saying, this.
You said that you're sitting here and you're wasting your time, or.
I'm not wasting my time. I'm using my time.
But you can always find some other people who have brilliant ideas, and you can invest it.
Okay. So obviously, it depends on your situation. If you've got money, then you can potentially invest. And But just because you've got money to invest doesn't mean you necessarily find. Sorry, there's two Dominika asked me about co-founders as opposed to like people to invest in, and my journey was a little unusual. That I reinvested the money I made in my first business in lots of other startups, thinking that I was a genius, and discovered very rapidly that over a slow period, I discovered that I wasn't a genius. I'd just been lucky with my early business. So, but I think one thing is understanding that it doesn't have to be about you. You may have your great idea, and you talk to people and you ask them what they think, but ask them about their ideas. And even things like, even if someone makes a good impression on you, and you think that person is the sort of person who might be successful, you can say to them, if you ever do have an idea, send me a message, because I'm really interested. And, for most people, that's a slightly unusually pleasant experience. It's rather rare in Poland for someone to say, I would really like to go into business with you if you ever start a business. Obviously, if you say it to everyone in the room, that's a bit like being a sad guy at a party talking to every girl saying, do you want to be my girlfriend? You can come across as a bit needy and sort of pathetic. But if you're discriminating and you say to people who make a good impression, I'm interested, is there any way I can help you? Then that's stage one. But then you do have to be helpful. You have to do so. You make a few phone calls, look something up, try and position yourself. But that's only part of it. I think it's quite but it's all about people, finding the people who you believe will be successful.
You touched another very important aspect, which I think it's very unique to your, let's say, approach, and also your journey, in a way that you were always having that particular culture of giving back, this culture of networking, right, and meeting others, mentoring others. Can you tell us what type of benefits it was bringing to you personally, and what's advantage of having that approach for someone, so that we can convince people that this is not the waste of time, but some kind of long-term investment?
When I came to Poland, everyone told me, which was in 31 stycznia 91 roku, I came to live here on the 31st of January 1991, when it was minus 16 degrees centigrade, and the fuel in my soon-to-be father-in-law's Trabant froze, and we got stuck. Everyone said you can't do anything in Poland without making contacts. I was brought up in an unusually religious household in the UK, but I believe that when I was born I had no contacts, and when I die I will have no contacts. And people react to people according to how they behave, and if you assume that everyone in this room is going to cheat you and is very dishonest and they're going to screw you over, probably you won't make many positive connections. If you assume everyone here is valuable and can help you achieve your goals in life, it will make it true. Your expectations create the reality. If you're friendly to people, they will be friendly back. So, and not everyone realizes. And Poland is. I love Poland, but Poland is not a super optimistic culture. I don't know. Nigdy nie wolno nikogo nie ufać. It's like never trust anybody. A lot of Poles are brought up with this, their grandparents and depressed babcia. Your depressed grandmother is preaching at you every Sunday. Don't trust anyone; they're going to screw you over. And learning that trust is efficient. Obviously, be careful. I mean, I've been cheated by people in Poland, in the UK, and America. It's not that you have to be stupidly. You don't give your PIN number and your debit card to a total stranger. That would be dumb. But I think the culture of talking to strangers, listening to them, asking how you can help, and even if you don't make any money, it just makes your life much more interesting, because you learn more about people if you offer to help them. And somehow I think a lot of people assume that it's somehow set. There are people with the contacts who know everyone, Myers and I, people who have the contacts, and there's everyone else. And in fact, it's a choice. You can make and just coming to events like this, and I will do this at the end of the structured bit of the evening. I would say, find three people you don't know, and just introduce yourself to those three people. It makes a big difference, because if you just go to events to talk to your friends, you just end up with a few friends who don't know anyone new.
Thank you, Richard.